everyone, welcome to Two Car Pros. My name is Ryan, and today we're continuing our world's cheapest supercar build with episode 2, sway bar and fuel system. The car in question is what's behind me right now. It's a factory 5 GTM from around the year of 2006, but the engine is much newer, as is the transmission. So this is going to be one updated, really awesome track car when it's all done. I'm recording the entire journey from when I received the car to when the car is completely done. It'll be in a big playlist here on YouTube, so if you've missed the first episode, make sure you go back and check that one out. It's very, very exciting because it's when I first get the car. But today, now we're into the hard work. And when I say hard work, I mean fun work. So let's jump in. So as you can see, a little bit of changes have happened. I put on the intake manifold with our fuel rails back on there. Put the steam line back on. I put the exhaust on here with built-in cats, which is super cool. Hopefully it'll tame the noise and the smell a little bit. That would be great. Everything is very nice and rigid, which is super cool. This whole kit has actually been really fun to build so far. But I think today what we're going to tackle is the fuel system, and then maybe put the sway bar in as well, because we got that back from Powder Coat. So a super fun day, and I'm going to show you exactly how I'm going to do it. Next thing I do is remove the front sway bar. It has the spline plate, so this arm actually connects to the lower control arm, and that attaches to the sway bar. And this rusted piece actually has the splines to make the whole thing work. And this piece is rusted, and if you saw the previous video, the whole rest of the sway bar is rusted. So it needs to come out and be powder coated and put back. So let's take it out. And then when you're taking things apart like this, just as, you know, a tip from me to you, is hardware like this is, well, rusty. It needs to be cleaned up a little bit, but it's not like it's difficult to find, but it's a pain in the neck when you're rearing to put your car back together and you can't find the fasteners. So I always just put them in a Ziploc bag and label them. Like this one I'll be labeling sway bar. And I'm gonna hold the link between the sway bar end link and the spline block, because it's just going to want to plop down as soon as I take it off. Now, I don't even have to remove this. I can just lightly set it like this so it doesn't get lost, because this doesn't actually need to come off. I need to put everything back together and tighten it. And I was worried that this wasn't going to be labeled, but check it out. It's really hard to see, but there is actually an R on here, which is interesting because that means this is on backward, and R needs to be on the passenger side, not the driver's side. But we can just remove our sway bar like that, and take it over and get it powder coated. Except for this aluminum bushing, this will stay here because we don't need to powder coat this. Just fine to stay aluminum. So here's what the spline blocks and the sway bar look like before powder coating and after. Looks very nice. Now you can see what I was talking about. One has an L, the other one has an R. We'll have to see there, but the powder coating job looks very, very nice. And also, it is a couple of months later. Check it out. My sway bar hardware are all in this Ziploc waiting for me. So this is why it pays to stay organized. A good tip too is to grease the inside of the bushing, so that way it doesn't squeak. So I went ahead and greased both bushings. This will ensure that our sway bar doesn't just squeak all over the darn place, because that's annoying. And then we're just going to slide our sway bar in. We'll just slide that into its home like this. Now, the powder coating has caused the fit to be a little more snug than I would have liked. That's why having a plastic hammer is crazy essential. So you can kind of hammer it in place. All right, looks pretty good. And then I'm gonna grease right here as well. I'm gonna slip this aluminum spacer over right there so the spline block has something to tighten against. So I've noticed that on the actual sway bar link, it has an R on it right there, which kind of indicates to me that maybe it has to have it flipped that way, because these are just used Corvette parts. So I'm just going to put the right one on the left side of the car like I found it, because it matches the link, and it might have to be that way, and that's just kind of how kit cars are. Give it some taps. There we go. So basically you want to clock it so the end link arm kind of looks like that, because you can see it's really not going to be happy unless it's just like this, and then everything can be tightened down, and this way ball will work properly. Oh, like right on the money. That's crazy. Cool. And whenever you're putting something like this together where there's multiple fasteners in multiple locations and multiple size, I always start with the big one. Just get it threaded, and then you can thread in the smaller one. This one actually uses 3 different size fasteners. Take your favorite prying implement. Can help line it up. I have to wiggle this back and forth a little bit just to kind of get the threads to engage. Looks good. So doing the middle one first kind of ensures that the whole thing will go down parallel, and these should just thread in hand tight. And there you go. That end link is installed. Looking really, really good. I like that a lot. So now you can see our sway bar is completely installed. It looks exactly the same on the passenger side, but now it's nice and powder coated instead of all rusty and icky. Now, if in the future I think that this distance is too close between the upper control arm and the sway bar end link here, I can always change that. I can tighten this turnbuckle and make that distance shorter. It's going to depend on the track field. You also got to remember, as this shock compresses, gets shorter, the distance between here and here will basically stay parallel with each other. They're going to want to do this with each other. And if I find that they're touching or a little bit too close, I'll change it later. But for right now, that looks like $1,000,000. So first we kind of got to imagine how it's going to go. So the fuel is going to come out of the tank, go into a filter, go over to this fuel rail, go through the fuel rail, come down, come out of this fuel rail, into this fuel rail, come out, head over that way, come out of this fitting, and go into our regulator. So I gotta figure out where I'm gonna put the send return. So this is gonna bring our fuel pressure down to 58 PSI, because the pump's probably spitting out at least 70. And then, yeah, it's just gonna be not dead-headed, but it's going to have just the single return instead of a double return. Back when I did an LS swap series on a Bel Air, I wasn't sure if it had a bypass in the tank, like actually in the pump, but I know this one does, so you can run it with a single return instead of 2. So if you're wondering why I'm doing things just a touch different, that'd be why. So before we start plumbing things, let's start at the beginning. This is where our fuel pump lives. You can tell by the electrical connector and the send and return. So let's start with our send. Let's get fuel to the engine. Before it gets there, we need to put it through a fuel filter, which is what this is. And you can kind of see the word flow right there. And I've pulled this out to see that the arrow for it is pointing that way. So we know the flow goes that way. So it comes out of the tank into this fitting, but I also noticed the fittings are totally loose. They've never been touched, so we need to fix that. I've also noticed that these use a rubber O-ring, so it's a good idea, actually it's essential, to just give it a nice little spray of WD-40 or any kind of lubricant, and that will help seal it and preserve the O-ring itself, because you can ruin it by just putting on O-rings dry. Don't ever do it. One wrench to hold the filter, another wrench to tighten it down, and this is a -11 in case you're curious at home. And there we go. It doesn't need to be like crazy tight. I'm just doing my best not to scratch the nice black anodized coating. And then we just do the same treatment for the other side. Be very gentle. And there you go. Now the filter's ready to be plumbed. So connect the send to the fuel filter, and I have this pre-made really nice hose that actually came with the car. So I'm pretty sure it's designed to fit on something like this. I'll leave it loose for now, and then kind of just bend back. And the way you're doing, then the reason you do it that way is that way you don't have any stress or tension on the fitting or risk it butting up against the outside of the car, because you got to remember the skin of the car is going to be kind of like this. So it's important to have that sort of mindset when you're building one of these cars. And then it's just a -8, which is decent size for fuel. I usually only go -6, but you know what? -8's not super crazy. I've seen people use -12 on fuel. This is just fine. There we go. That's looking pretty good. So we're kind of like 1/8 of the way there. And I have another -8 line that goes on the outboard side, out going side of the fuel filter. And I'm just gonna get it threaded like that. I'm gonna leave it loose so I can kind of manipulate it a little bit. And we just kind of route the fuel line. I think I want it behind here. And then we just kind of route the fuel line how we want it to go onto the fuel rail. I'm glad I left that fitting a little loose. So I do want to change its angle just a touch. Yeah, all right. Looks pretty good. And this can all be changed later. I might change things, who knows? But, you know, with cars like this, sometimes you absolutely have to go forward to move backward to move forward again. That's just the nature of the beast. So what I'm doing might not be permanent. I hope it is, though. And don't forget this guy. And just, you know, just wrist tight on AN stuff. It doesn't need to be Omega Hulk tight because it is a tapered fitting. And then we can connect our crossover line that goes from this fuel rail to this fuel rail. This one's pretty easy. Again, I just have this nice and handy -8 line. These are super easy to build, by the way. So if you have like a project that has an odd fuel system, then you need some sort of bendable line. Look how easy this is. Anybody could do AN stuff. That's why it's super popular and fun. And I think it looks very snazzy when it's all done. Look at that. It even matches kind of the contour of the intake manifold. And then again, just snug. Snug is just fine. You just want to make sure nothing's touching, because if this line is touching the intake manifold, maybe it catches a sharp edge for a few months or years, and then it'll just kind of seesaw its way through, and then you'll have a fuel leak in the engine bay where it's hot, where it's not, you know, good. Not a good thing. So, you know, you just kind of want to keep an eye on those sort of things. Just like that. Very nice. And yes, I am changing the throttle body to the 102, whichever one that this intake manifold wants. This is just the stock one, so that'll be coming off, and the proper one will be going on. So I've taken the fuel regulator in and out like 6 times, trying to figure out how I want to do this exactly. One thing I know for sure is I want that -6 there. So we can go ahead and give it some sauce and lock that down. So I'm happy with its placement. There we go. Wipe off the excess. It'll be fine. It's going to a race car. And then what I've kind of noticed is the swirl tank for the coolant is like right where my right hand is. There's just no way you're ever going to get a fitting to go in there like that. I kind of was hoping I'd be able to use something like this and this fuel pressure sender, but I think that's kind of a pipe dream at this point. If I really want it back at some point, I can totally do that and put one in. I even contended with putting it like this, but it looked really goofy, so we're not gonna do that. What we're gonna do instead is just go old school, regular dial. So that's what we're gonna do. I already pipe taped it up with petroleum safe pipe tape. And then always use the sort of square surface on the back to tighten it down. Don't grab it by the gauge. And I think this will look a lot more hot rod and be a lot more simple. So I'm a simple man. Simple's good. So just until it's about eyeball even. Doesn't need to be dead nuts on. That looks pretty good actually. So that's pretty cool. And then this is where I'm going to put our -10 fitting. Again, give it some sauce. Put in its threads. You know, actually, I think these are -11. Let's see. -11. Oh, fits right in the money. For a long time, I didn't even think they made -11. I thought it just went from 10 to 12, but here we are. There we go. Doesn't need to be crazy tight. So then that leaves this big old honking hole here. What do you do there? Normally, if you know, had a whole awesome race shop or whatever, you wouldn't, you know, you would just wander over and find the correct -11 plug. But I have this adapter and this plug, so I'm just going to put these two together and call it a day. And if it truly bugs me in the future, I can just replace it really easy. It's another advantage of using AN stuff. It is just ridiculously simple, but functional. Kind of like me. And there we are. That's sort of what it's going to look like what's in the car. We're going to have this coming in from our fuel rail, and this is going to be returning to our fuel tank. So here's where it's going on the car. These two holes match the backing plate for the regulator. So you can see why I didn't want it to come out of the right side over here, because then it would hit into the coolant tank, which is never good. So something like this, you don't really need to tighten like crazy Omega Hulk tight. I know that's my normal standard. These are very small fasteners, and it's really easy to overdo them. And then you just snap them off and feel foolish. So now you can kind of see what I'm cooking here. I'm gonna put a right angle here that's gonna go down to the fuel rail, and then this, I'm kind of thinking of putting it just right here, right into this side of the tank. It has two tanks and it's connected with a big old line. So if you put the return here, it's just gonna feed back into the whole tank system as a whole. So I might be doing that. And don't worry about evap. It has a whole nother set of T's for evaps. I'm not really sure why it has so many of them, but I think I can use that as a return. I'm gonna try that. And again, I have one of these pre-made lines that came with the car. It's pretty cool. So that's gonna connect there. Pretty cool. And this here. So it's a little too long for what I want to do, but I think it's gonna be okay. I think we're gonna make it. As long as it's not touching anything hot or that moves, I'm gonna rock it. And then just give it a little tightening. Just wrist tight is perfectly fine. While you brace the fitting. Just like that. We are almost done with the fuel system. So I just made this little teeny tiny -6 line. Hope it works. Should. It'll have a little bit of a S bend to it. That's all right. Yeah, there we go. That is perfect. You might be pounding your keyboard. What happened to the other return? I saw it in the previous scene. You can't ignore me. Oh, trust me, I wish I could ignore you. But I'm not going to. I just have a cap. I'm just gonna cap it off. And again, things might change, things might look different, but I think this is gonna be just fine the way it is. And if I ever need to change anything, I will. Good enough. So typically on most hot rodded cars, I don't usually bother with any kind of evap, charcoal canister system, anything like that. You just had a vented cap and you're done. But this has something a little more special. It actually has a place for those vapors to escape to, and we gotta give it a path to go. So I have this, surprise, another AN line. We're essentially gonna connect the top of both tanks together and then tie it to a charcoal canister, and that will be very good. And we can just kind of route it how we want it. I kind of like it under like this. Yeah, it looks pretty good. And that's just gonna connect to right here. Oh, we're so close, I can almost taste it. So now we can put on our evap line that I just made. It narrowly misses this bracket for the 5-point harness. That's pretty cool. Leave everything a little loose because I want to be able to twist things. That is looking pretty snazzy. If you're gonna use AN stuff, this is my first Earl's fitting car that I've ever had. Those are really nice. I've always just used the like cheapo brands and they've been fine, but the Earl stuff's really nice to work with. Yeah, looks pretty good. Keep in mind, not all the fittings have been Earl's on this thing. I just need to tighten this right here. There we go. And there we go. The fuel system is nearly complete, and I'll show you why. So at the bottom of each fuel tank, because remember this car has two, one on the driver, one on the passenger. This is the driver. There is this fitting, I think it's a -16, and then it's gonna have another fuel line that runs from here over to the other tank, connecting the two. So that is how those two are going to share a connection, just like a regular Corvette. They also have a big line connecting them. Some cars will have saddle tanks, but they're connected by, you know, basically a big piece of the tank. It's kind of molded that way, but on this car, it's gonna require this, and I think it's gonna be easier to do once the car is on the lift and off this cart. So let's go ahead and review how the fuel system works. We start here at the pump, comes up like this through the filter, all the way to the fuel rail, over to this fuel rail, over to the regulator. The regulator forces the fuel pressure down. The pump inside the tank has a bypass in it, so don't worry about hurting that. Excess fuel is sent down to that tank, and that tank has that cross pipe that I showed you earlier, and then we just have our evap system go from the tops of the tanks over into the charcoal can. Very, very easy. This is about as easy as fuel injection basically gets. I'm not sure you could get easier than this. It's very, very simple. I guess you could go deadhead, but I don't like doing that. And then if you didn't have the crossover tube, the big line that I showed you earlier, you would just connect the return back over to this tank just in case if you only had one gas tank, but again, this car has two. So that is episode number 2 of the Factory 5 GTM build, aka the world's cheapest supercar. I'm really excited to keep going on this build. It is my official front burner project, so this project will be updated every 2 weeks or so or thereabouts. Sometimes at roadblocks, but I'm trying to get an update for this car every 2 weeks until it's done. No guarantees on that, but that's what I'm gonna do. That is my goal as far as getting this car done. If I stick to a strict 2-week schedule, then the car will get done very quickly, and I might be doing different kinds of changes. If this was your Factory 5 GTM, what would you change? What would you do different? I'm very interested to hearing your opinions, so make sure you leave a comment down below. If you like what I do here on this channel and you want to help out directly, you can go down below and click the members button. It is a direct way to support the channel and ensure this content keeps coming. Otherwise, a subscription, like, and comment go a long way in the algorithm, and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.